And these recommendations in the paper, and we also have discussed today, are mainly based on interview data and partly from the literature review, and are also directed to the media organizations. And this means that they mainly emphasize a perspective of the concerned individuals or groups or media workers. But if we take it from the perspective of the media company, the recommendations are directed to, we know that also recommendations will be not automatically implemented in the company. We have you discuss it. And this is one consequence of the closeness also for organizations within system theory. And it means that events outside the media companies have a limited, or using a classical term, non-intended impact. And thus, the requirements of mass media organizations from political authorities or even from researchers may have difficulties in being realized, as we know. So, organizations are expected to regard and be influenced by the outside of the world, while they themselves also influence the outside world. But they have also the possibility to choose not to care about what is happening in the outside world as to diversity issues. So what is to do? Is it not an idea to give recommendations? To my mind, I think it's necessary, and this was, I think, the point of Franz here. It is necessary to find connections which make it easier to convince media companies of implementing diversity strategies. And from the literature now, it is apparent that diversity management, this diversity management strategy, presuppose in a way a new reflection within companies on how to implement diversity issues in companies. And I think it's a new development here going on. And diversity management is thus a prominent example where cultural diversity is viewed foremost as a resource, as an asset that was Franz was talking about, to the organization. And diversity management is presented as a best practice or a way for adjusting the organization to the market situation. And for example, the Charter of Diversity, you mentioned it in the report, is it, I think, a very good example initiated by a lot of private companies, and Sweden is within this charter, also Germany, Italy is also. And they say, the German Charter of Diversity, for instance, as I quote, "We can only be successful in business if we acknowledge and leverage diversity. That includes the diversity of our workforces and the diverse needs of our customers and other business partners." And they have acknowledged this, and they say themselves that it's very important for the company. So, and the statement indicates that this management strategy is not an accidental phenomenon, since it also seems to have remained rather stable throughout the last crisis. And more European companies have joined this charter. So, and that's why if you recommend, maybe on page 40, a better communication and information sharing between and across newsmaking organizations, so to my mind, this charter can maybe function as a kind of forum to share information on this subject, and they recommend also training activities and so on. So, as I mentioned, Italy has, for instance, joined the charter. I think not Ireland or not the UK either, but maybe it could be an idea to refer to this initiative and to look up this initiative. There are not so much media companies within this, but now it's in Germany, not in Sweden, but maybe they will join this. And surveys done in our project have also shown that most mass media companies in Sweden apply some kind of diversity management and evaluate it as a winning strategy. And the public television company in Sweden has rather well-documented diversity policy and plans, like the Dutch Although the leading private company, TV4 in Sweden, does not have a comparable leading strategy, but their policy is about the same almost. So I wonder if the recommendation on page 41 would make a difference. There is a need for a specific diversity champion department. You have also discussed it here. So it can also, and this was also the discussion in group 2, this can also be a risk with a specific diversity department, that all these questions are only concentrated, and in this department it maybe can hinder mainstreaming. Another remark I want to make on the word migrant integration. As a scholar, I'm skeptical about this term of integration. I think if one argues in favor of integration, someone must have the power to define those norms which everyone ought to be integrated into. And this idea of integration was, in principle, the idea of Durkheim, of the necessity of a homogeneous population as to norms and values. And as a main argument, he said, and also the follows, for justifying the idea of integration and homogeneity was that society would fall apart without common norms and values. But I think Durkheim was, however, as a German sociologist, Niklas Luhmann has shown in detail wrong in his judgment of the consequences of the growing differentiation of society. While too many demands on integration and homogeneity may result in more conflicts and disintegration, heterogeneity and diversity instead open up for possibilities for managing contradiction, disagreements, and conflicts, and thus allowing modern society to survive. This also reflected on the diversity management. And also to quote from a critical report of Swedish integration policy, quote, while immigrant integration and participation is well covered, there appears to be very little research on the integration of Swedes into the multicultural society. An extension of this would include research on cultural relations between ethnic groups, including the Swedes. But maybe the paper is, of course, not the place to cut this term, but I think it's necessary to be also maybe a little bit more critical toward this term. Okay, but I can end here, so.